think people are trickling right now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our latest webinar. A few people are jumping in. Oop, more and more people are coming in. As you're jumping in, feel free to put in the chat, hi. Put your name, where you're tuning in from today. We'll have a small little exercise to add more, but for now, just, introduce yourself to the folks on the call. This is going to be the start of our fun conversation on Congress's budget. If you're like me, who's been spinning your head around trying to figure out what's going on, this is for you. This is to understand the process and get involved. So welcome. There we go. Lily asked, will we get the replay? You mean the recording of this? Most definitely. So we are recording this meeting at the moment. Everybody who attended will get the recording sent to them. And everyone who RSVP'd and did not attend will get the recording as well, so they don't miss out on this information. And so you could share this out far and wide. Oh, you wish you, yeah, we wish you could stay too, Lily. Thanks for at least jumping in. All right. We'll start in just probably a minute or so, but for the folks who just jumped in, make sure to put your name, where you're tuning in from in the chat. We might have some new folks on here. We've had a good outreach from some of our partners and coalition members. And so if you're not familiar with dream.org, you'll learn in a moment who we are, but you could put your affiliation as well if you're part of an organization doing some of the work as well. Welcome everybody. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So, hi everybody, my name is Tori Soriano. I'm gonna be facilitating the beginning of this webinar. So welcome to Green Jobs, Medicaid, and Justice. Yeah, we're having a full-on discussion today, all about the congressional budget and what you need to be ready for to mobilize and be ready to take action. And so thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon, evening, depending where you're at. I'll go over the roadmap for today. So we're going to start off. I'll introduce dream.org. We're going to be doing a lot of cross-programmatic work and discussions today. So I'll introduce who we are and what issues we are working on. And then I will pass it to Kyle to introduce himself on the reconciliation process, as well as talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. And then he'll pass it off to Candia to talk about Medicaid, and then we'll open it up for questions. And so throughout this presentation, we're going to be going over a lot of things, maybe things you didn't know about before, many things you might have questions before or after. And so throughout the presentation, you can either use the Q&A button at the bottom to insert your question, or just type it in the chat. We have folks on here who are going to be monitoring the chat, but we will designate the time at the very end for Q&A. So, but put them in the chat so you don't forget. We don't want you to lose your question. So put it in as soon as you get it, or you can wait till the very end to voice or type out your question. All right, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we are dream.org. We close prison doors and open the doors of opportunity for the green economy. And we dream of a world beyond poverty, pollution, prisons, and polarization. And so you might have noticed that this conversation is revolving around Medicaid and the Inflation Reduction Act, all about public health, accessibility needs for everybody to have access to, no matter what your circumstances are, and job creation, economic equity, economic opportunity, These are all the things that we are involving in dream.org. And so this is going to be a great conversation to kind of culminate all of our work in one fancy webinar. So thanks for joining us. And to answer your question, the slides, I think they could be shared. Yeah, we could share out the slides as well as the presentation. All right, next slide. So before we start the presentation, we're going to do a Menti moment. For those of you who have never heard of Mentimeter, it's just a fun little opportunity to get to know folks in a fun way. And so if you want to participate, you can use the QR code right here, scan it with your phone. That will pull up the Mentimeter, which is the question I'm about to ask. Or you can go to menti.com and then add this code down here, and that will take you to our Mentimeter. And so you can go ahead and stop sharing your slides, Shelby. I'll share mine. All right, so I'll flash this up again for those of you who didn't get a chance to get it the first time. QR code or type menti.com. Looks like we got a few folks in the queue. And when I change the slide, in case you join in late, you could see the code up top as well. All right. And so the question I'm going to ask everybody is, what brought you here today? We are talking about Medicaid. We're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. We're talking about Congress and their budgets. And so maybe you resonate with, Medicaid. Maybe you resonate with clean jobs and clean energy, lowering energy bills, affordable bills. Maybe you're just like, I want to know what this is all about. I don't know the process. And so I'll read a few of you for folks who are maybe listening and not being able to see. We got defend Medicaid, subject matter, because I hate my congressman and love Medicaid. IRA info, oh, you're going to get a lot of that. Care about what happened, stopping Trump's attack on jobs and life-saving Medicaid. Want to help others, educate myself, learn about the process, learn about the reconciliation process. That's a word that I keep misspelling. Worrying about Medicaid cuts. Need guidance on what to do next. Ooh, you'll love that and our next webinar. Learn how to speak to elected officials in order to lobby for better policies. We're good at that. Community impact, family. Family is scared. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, this is going to impact a lot of folks, a lot of families, a lot of people. Educate myself further. Oh, look, we have someone who's working actively on Inflation Reduction Act, but their brother needs Medicaid. And so, yeah, this affects everybody, no matter what issues you work on. Green jobs, reentry with Medicaid, possible cuts to Medicaid. Want to know what's happening in DC? Yeah, me too, because the process is kind of confusing. Yeah, it seems like we're all kind of here to learn and educate ourselves, and then to mobilize and activate on behalf of these issues. And so I think we're all in alignment. Thank you for everybody for participating. I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll pass it back to Shelby. And I will pass it to Kyle to go over what the heck reconciliation is. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Tori, and thanks for joining us today, everybody. It's great to be with you. My name is Kyle Kameen. I'm our policy director here for our Green for All work, which is our climate and clean energy portfolio here at dream.org. I will do my best to outline what is a complicated process known as reconciliation, and kind of give you a sense of where we are right now in that process, where Congress is right now in that process, and what it means for the Inflation Reduction Act. And then I will hand it over to my colleague Candia, who will dive into kind of the nuances around Medicaid and the reconciliation process. And as Tori said, more than happy to answer some questions later. So I'm ready for the next slide. So the reconciliation process is a budget tool that Congress can use that is different from their normal appropriations and budget cycle. The reason it is typically used is because it is faster and it allows them to get pass policies with simple majorities as opposed to the normal 60 vote threshold in the Senate. So it's a much easier tool to pass significant pieces of legislation, especially if you don't have 60 senators from your own party. And for context, the Inflation Reduction Act itself was passed via reconciliation in 2022. And so today, where we stand with the reconciliation process is Congress and the Republican majorities in the Senate and the House are looking to use it to do a number of things, to advance a number of their own and the president's policy priorities, such as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was passed in 2017, which largely benefits the wealthy with those tax cuts. They want to make them permanent. And so in order to do that and pass some of their other budget priorities around the border, et cetera, they need to pass a bill that helps them raise the funds and reappropriate the funds to do so. To start that process, they have to pass what's called a budget resolution. A budget resolution is the starting line that gives the instructions for what they want to do. It gives them how much money they want to raise, how much money they want to spend, and then kind of designates to each committee in Congress. So each committee in Congress has their own issue set that they work on and focus on that's called their jurisdiction. And it assigns to each committee how much they need to either cut in spending, so that would be money that they raise, or how much money that they are being directed to spend in new programs. So currently, where we stand is each chamber, the House and the Senate, have passed a budget resolution, but those resolutions are very different from one another. The House has been operating under the assumption that they were going to pass one giant bill that seeks to accomplish as much of their priorities as they can, and the Senate was operating under the assumption that they would pass two, one that was smaller, more narrow, and that they could get passed quickly, and another one later this year. Because of some of the challenges that I'll get into in the negotiation process, to this point, they had disagreed strongly and had started down their own paths. But there was actually a meeting Tuesday. I was going to say yesterday, but it is Thursday. There was a meeting on Tuesday with the White House where the White House and leaders from the House and Senate Republicans got together and kind of started singing from the same song sheet. And their goal is to pass a compromise budget resolution that is the same for both chambers by the Easter break. Now, that would be by April 11th. The House will be out for 2 weeks for Easter break back in their districts after that. That remains to be seen. Frankly, a budget resolution is the easy part. They don't actually have to decide what they're cutting or how they're raising this money. They simply have to decide the numbers that they seek to achieve. And then the hard part about deciding what's in that comes next. So that's the negotiation piece. Political dynamics here are, paramount, even within a party. I think it's no secret to all of us that whether Democrats or Republicans, people can disagree in the same party about how they want to achieve things and what their priorities are. And that's no different, with this Congress. I'd say that we have seen this Congress be a little bit more supplicant to the president than maybe we anticipated, but that doesn't mean that'll last forever. It's still early days. And kind of, often the kumbaya stuff wears off and kind of the internecine debates really begin. And so it's unclear if that will happen here, but I think history tells us it usually does. And they have a very narrow majority. So if individual members in the Senate or the House say, I will not vote for this bill if it includes steep Medicaid cuts, which Senator Josh Hawley is on the record for saying, for example, in the Senate. Or if they say, I will not vote for this bill if it completely guts Medicaid, or completely guts the IRA, which 21 House Republicans have said they will not do. That really puts them in a tough spot when you have a narrow majority because you can't afford to lose 21 votes. In fact, in the House, the numbers keep changing for a number of different reasons at the moment, but I think they have something like a 5 vote threshold or less, where they can only lose 5 members on this bill and it fails. Um, and that really starts to play into their math problems. The current uh, proposals are looking to cut between 1.5 and $2 trillion in spending over 10 years. This is because to extend those tax cuts from 2017 and to spend more on defense and the border, it looks like it'll cost about $5 trillion over the next 10 years. And in order to be fiscally responsible, Republicans would argue, they need to cut existing spending by at least 1.5 to $2 trillion. And the entire discretionary budget for the United States government on an annual basis is less than $2 trillion. And half of that is defense spending. So you start to do the math and realize it gets pretty hard to cut 2 trillion over 10 years when you're only working from less than $1 trillion a year and you're unwilling to touch a bunch of that spending for a number of political reasons. And Medicaid and the IRA are two big buckets of money that they're looking at to take huge swings at to start to get up to those numbers. But as I already outlined, when you have individual members who are saying you can't do that, it really makes your math tough. And then finally, what we should think about is what everybody should understand is that in the Senate, reconciliation has a very specific set of rules that you must follow. And this is for the House and the Senate. But in the Senate, there is an official called the parliamentarian. And they get to decide if what members of Congress have put in the legislation follows the rules of reconciliation. These can get very technical, so I'm not going to dive into all of them, but I will give you a quick overview. Essentially, everything that's put in reconciliation cannot be purely policy. It must either spend or save money, and that has to be its intention. It cannot merely save or spend money, but in the guise of policy. It must be intended to save or spend money. So you can see how this would get pretty complicated. These additionally, there are a number of other rules like it must be in accordance with the instructions that were outlined in the budget resolution. It must have been decided by the Senate or House committee that has jurisdiction over that policy area. So it can get really wonky. And we don't need to dive down all of that today, but I just want to give you a sense of how much this negotiation debate really gets down to, the nitty gritty, and that there is another part of the institution that plays a role in that. And finally, I already touched on the fact that there is disagreement between the House and the Senate on what to include in their respective budget resolutions and ultimately in the legislation itself. And so there will be some question of whether there's going to have to be a conference between the House and the Senate. These used to be more common than they are now, conferences on legislation to hash out essentially an agreement that then they take back to their chambers and they both have to pass. Usually what we see is one chamber passing something and kind of challenging the other one to not vote for it or to vote for it. We'll see, but it's possible that there would be a conference in this situation as well. Finally, once they have managed to get through the resolution, get through all of the negotiations, and come up with a piece of legislation that they agree on, there's passage. And as I mentioned already, both chambers will have to pass it. Both chambers need a simple majority, which is not the norm. Typically in the Senate, you need 60 votes to file for cloture or to secure cloture on a piece of legislation and then to vote for it again on the floor for passage. And so that's a huge advantage here, for reconciliation, particularly when Republicans have 53 senators. They have some wiggle room, so to speak, to pass this. One of the things that is another kind of component about passage for a reconciliation bill is that there are limitations on debate once it's been passed, and then there's what's called a vote-a-rama. So there's only 20 hours allowed for debate on a reconciliation bill in the Senate when they've come up with a final package. And then there's what's called the vote-a-rama. And this is an opportunity for amendments to be filed and voted on the floor. And this is where we see, typically the opposition party, sometimes members of their own party, really holding their peers' feet to the fire on what are politically sensitive issues. And they can put amendments on the floor to change this thing. And often these votoramas will last hours and hours into the early morning. Sometimes they've gone all night into like 4 o'clock in the morning. And the goal is really just to make the process as painful as possible, but also to get people on the record on politically sensitive issues that they want to use against them for future political reasons, such as votes, etc. Right now, what we're hearing based on this kind of Easter compromise process, etc., the target passage date is Memorial Day. This is possible, but I would say it's going to be a real challenge. We've already talked about the fact that they haven't passed a budget resolution that they both agree upon. We've talked about all the negotiation issues. In the IRA, we saw how many times that died and was brought back to life, died and was brought back to life until it finally passed, and Senator Manchin came back to the table. There could be another dynamic like that here where it could drag on for months. And not to mention, they are also competing against the debt ceiling, which the United States will hit sometime, it's estimated in August or September, and that is tied up in all of this debate. So, unfortunately, I can't give you more clarity than that's their goal and that it's an ambitious one. But I do think that they will get something done. They're going to face a lot of pressure, political pressure from the president and from others, and something will be passed via reconciliation, the details of which aren't completely clear yet. So if you go ahead and move me to the next slide, I can dive in on the IRA specifically. All right. So we've talked about reconciliation, as complicated as that is, and hopefully I was a little bit clear. The Inflation Reduction Act itself, and I'm going to try and be quick here because I'm getting close on time. It's a big bucket of money. That's why it's attractive. It's attractive because originally it was supposed to be $369 billion, and the Congressional Budget Office scores it at over $1 trillion over 10 years now. So it's a big bucket of money that they can go get some from, and it's a political target. We know how the president campaigned against the Green New Deal, whether or not we understand that that's not true, et cetera. It doesn't matter. It's a political target. There are kind of three buckets of this that we want to look at for, and this is simplifying the legislation. The legislation is massive and very complex, but I kind of want to talk about three buckets. One is, and how vulnerable they are to reconciliation. One is the tax credits themselves. That was really the main vehicle to spur investment and address climate change in this piece of legislation, were tax credits, were to make it more financially attractive to do things that were better for the climate and the environment. That was the mechanism. And those credits spend a lot of money because that is revenue that the United States government is foregoing. And so there are a number of credits that we can kind of take a look at, but I think the important ones to kind of understand are the EV credits, so that's the purchase and the leasing credit on EVs. It seems that EVs have certainly been a target of the president and others, although they did show off some Teslas on the White House lawn not too long ago. So, read into that what you will. But when it comes to the EV purchase credit or the EV leasing credit, it's important to know that the leasing credit seems extremely vulnerable, that it is more likely than not to go at this moment, and that the purchase credit is also quite vulnerable. Other tax credits are the advanced manufacturing tax credit, so 45X. That credit is being used widely for a lot of these factory announcements that you're seeing across districts, a lot of them in Republican districts, the majority of them in Republican districts around the country. And that, has been talked about as maybe being tweaked, reduced, definition narrowed, et cetera. And then finally, investment and production tax credits, which are related to energy production and manufacturing, et cetera. And those credits are probably more safe than others, and largely because they've been so widely used and are technology neutral. But it's likely that because they are so big over time that they might be tweaked or reduced to raise some money to help offset the total cost of the tax cuts. The IRA also included a number of labor provisions meant to kind of support and expand union inclusion in a lot of this work around the country. Those, it's not a secret that unions and organized labor have, not really been a priority of Republican administrations and Congresses in the past. And those provisions are considered extremely vulnerable, and they also would raise money, so likely gone. And the home rebates and tax credits, those are another big bucket of money that it seems are extremely vulnerable. Of those three buckets, the credits are the ones that are most likely to survive in some form. This is kind of current guesses based on the information we're gathering. I would say that full repeal is something that's a priority of some members of Congress, but that we do have 21 House Republicans who've gone on the record publicly saying, like, we don't want to repeal this whole thing. Scalpel, not a hatchet. We need to protect some of these investments. They're really important to jobs and moving our country, keeping our country competitive and moving forward. Next slide, please. And just to kind of give a sense of the stakes of what full IRA repeal would mean, and this is based on modeling from a few different groups. Estimates are that energy bills on average, so for the average American household, would rise $371 per year by 2035. In some places, the research says $800 a year. So it could really be a dramatic cost increase for everybody. 1 million jobs long term. Right now, it'd be a couple 100,000, but long term, based on how these investments would grow, we're looking at about 1 million jobs over the course of about the next 10 years. There are currently $535 billion in clean energy investments announced across the country, and a lot of those are vulnerable if there's full IRA repeal because their math simply won't pencil out anymore. And finally, a litany of health impacts. We all understand that pollution impacts communities across this country, and that a lot of the benefits of clean energy are not simply climate and energy cost benefits, but are also health benefits when we talk about, particulate emissions, et cetera, and those impacts for people's health. And a lot of those health impacts, health benefits will be lost if we're not, progressing into a more clean energy environment. So I know I just threw a lot at everybody. Hopefully, we'll have plenty of time for questions later. But I do want to hand it over to my colleague, our Government Affairs Director, Candia Milton, to talk to you a little bit about the impacts as it relates to Medicaid. So Candia, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle, and thanks for the detailed explanation. It really sets the stage for this conversation around cuts to Medicaid, proposed cuts to Medicaid. And let me just say too, before I even dig into the cuts to Medicaid, many of you may have heard of recent proposed cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services, which compounds which would further compound the problem with respect to that would be caused by the cuts to Medicaid. And so, the president has proposed to cut $12 billion in grants out of the Health and Human Services budget. And so, as we talk about, and those are grants that go toward mental health services, addiction treatment, and other urgent health issues. And so, in addition to the proposed cuts to Medicaid, we're also looking at proposed cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, what do those dollars look like, the proposed cuts to Medicaid? We're looking at $880 billion in proposed cuts. And while estimates say that it would result in the loss of 1 million jobs, it would have $113 billion. It would cause a $113 billion decline in states' gross domestic product. But we're also looking at the prospects of $8.8 billion loss to state and local revenues in 2026 alone. And I want you to ponder that for a minute, because as we have this conversation, I don't want to just simply talk about the cuts. We want to talk about what the impacts are, and make certain that we're empowering you with information so that as you're talking to communities or within your community, to your friends and to your legislatures or in barbershops and beauty salons, you're able to come with accurate information with regards to the impacts of these cuts on people's lives. And so as much as we know that it has an economic impact, we also recognize that it has a public health and public safety nexus to it as well. What we know is that Medicaid strengthens public health as it continues to lower costs. When we talk about preventive services, Medicaid covers everything from vaccines to screenings to early interventions that really reduce hospitalization as well as emergency. It supports maternal and child health. Medicaid funds nearly half of U.S. births, ensuring healthy pregnancies as well as reducing infant mortality rates. And so it addresses the mental health crisis and provides services in that space as it's one of the nation's largest payer for mental health care, reducing the burden again on emergency room and law enforcement for that matter. Harm reduction services where it saves lives. It funds many programs for overdose preventions that help to curb the opioid crisis and reduce healthcare costs in the process. But we also know that it enhances our public safety, and while it reduces incarceration costs. People, move from being in jail by investing in Medicaid-funded crisis responses to mental health episodes, as well as deferring folks to mental health, or should I say, deferring them from the system and into mental health courts. And so, it takes the burdens off of jails and prisons and provides alternatives to incarceration, but also supports reentry. Medicaid actually reduces, or should I say, for justice involved individuals, it helps with access to health care, mental health services, again, and addiction treatments. And so there is what we find is with the investments in Medicaid, states who have invested in Medicaid expansion, we've seen reductions in overdoses as well as improved public safeties. And so, as much as there is a public health nexus to it, we know that it improves public safety. And so this isn't simply Medicaid as a do-good sort of resource. We know that it also is imperative to upholding our communities and keeping communities safe, lowering incarceration rates, and the burdens on emergency rooms and first responders. And so as we're out in communities, let's make certain that we're having these conversations. What gives me hope is just what Kyle said with regards to Senator Josh Hawley. I mean, if Josh Hawley doesn't speak highly of any programs that are of benefit to our communities, but for him to stand up and say that we will not have deep cuts into Medicaid should give us all hope. And so let's utilize those very words when we go into offices and have conversations with community and with folks in our legislature. If Josh Hawley is there, then all of them ought to be right about there. And I will say too that the president indicated that there would be no cuts to Medicaid. Well, let's hold him accountable to it. And then let's hold those who tend to follow his words accountable to it as well. And so we only have their words to live by, but let's make them live up to the very words that they spoke. Well, that concludes my report, Kyle. I think I beat you. I got under 10 minutes. And so we'll go into Q&A at this time for folks who might have questions. think I beat Josh too, by the way, from his comments the other day.
You're on a roll. We didn't have to timestamp you or anything. So I know this was a lot. Thank you both for presenting over the reconciliation process, the Inflation Reduction Act, and Medicaid, and more. I think this was a very detailed presentation, and so we'll make sure to have. I've been getting a lot of questions on it. But we will have the slides as well as the recording available in case you need to do a few recaps to make sure that you actually understand the process. But I will mention that, and Kyle kind of already mentioned this is an ongoing process. We are going to be keeping tabs on Congress for the next few weeks and next few months. And so even if you don't quite get the, understand the process now, we'll be keeping you updated as the process moves along. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Gabby, I don't know if you saw any in between. We were speaking now. All right, let's see. Looks like we have okay, we have a question from Shauna. How do you propose to hold a megalomaniac who has never been held to account in his life accountable?
I'll just jump in and say, this is a congressionally driven process. And so certainly the president has a bully pulpit and he's not afraid to use it. But this really comes down to Congress. And so that needs to be our focus in the reconciliation process. Not the president, it needs to be Congress.
All right, any last minute questions while we have our two lovely experts available to answer them?
Not really. I guess I'm a little confused. I'm considered a liability by the general employer because I have epilepsy. My seizures do not happen during the day, but people don't care. So I have been unemployed since like 2009. Everybody who's hired me has fired me within, it's been as short as 5 days and as long as 5.5 months. I'm also been kicked off of Medicaid. So what the heck can a person do? I know there are people in worse circumstances, but I do need medical care. So it's just, you don't have to answer this if you don't have an answer. There's a lot going on.
I don't have an answer for that one, Candy. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like it's a very specific situation. I mean, on its surface doesn't sound like it makes sense, but not knowing enough about the situation, it would be tough for me to comment as well.
Lauren, Lauren's comment in the chat, I think is a good one. Yeah.
Lauren, go ahead. I was just going to read what Lauren said.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just listening to the recording. I think this is directed to you, Elizabeth. I think that is a story that your federal and state representatives should hear. And I was going to go into it a little bit sooner after this process, but that storytelling and telling your story is the most effective way to get change, especially to your congressional representatives, because that's what we found to pass bills to make change. And so this is a public health crisis. That's a public health issue. And so hopefully you can maybe get your story and get yourself help by sharing your story out to your local representatives. And then I think, Kyle, you were about to go into Susan's question.
Yeah, I will try. I'm not 100% clear with the Schumer component of it, but just in general, cloture is the process by which they can end debate in the Senate, and it avoids the filibuster. And so what that means is that you need 60 votes to do so. You will vote on cloture individually, and that will be 60 votes. and then you will then vote for the bill on the floor. And what you'll often see is that people will vote for cloture so that they can end debate and just move on. And then if they really don't agree with the bill, they'll vote against it on the floor afterwards. But it's already past that 60 vote threshold, and now it gets 53, 54, whatever the number, and passes. But it allows them to kind of have it both ways, to move on, end the debate, but then say, I don't agree with this, and I'm gonna move on. Yeah, and I think I kind of just described that. It allows them to have it both ways.
Yeah. And yeah,
Could I just add that what I mean to say is that
Yeah.
there's the anger on both sides. They didn't do enough, and he's saying we really couldn't. Is it really about the votes, or is it about the issue of the Democrats, the view of the Democrats looking weak? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
Yeah, Sue, so what I sort of read between the lines too. I thought you were making a statement that they had the ability to filibuster, didn't do it. And so Democrats didn't implement any strategy to combat it. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. I mean, they're blaming and they're angry. I mean, people are blaming and angry, and he's explaining it one way, and then it sounds reasonable when he explains it, but also sounds reasonable when others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, I think our next question is, do you think regulation will come due to the spike in energy bills?
That's a tough question. Regulation for energy is pretty decentralized. State PUCs, public utility commissions, they have different titles in different states, but they're really the ones that regulate energy bills in individual states. So it is certainly possible that that will be the case in some places. But a lot of public utility commissions aren't particularly they often will give rate increases pretty regularly. So it's hard to say. I think that's going to require some activism, itself, if people want to pursue those. But we'll see. It's a little hard to say.
All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat.
If I may too, stress the importance of reaching out to members of Congress. And we have a lobby day, virtual lobby day coming up, and it's regarding specific pieces of legislation as well as Medicaid. But what we're finding is, with all of the cuts vis-a-vis Doge, what they're using is the budget process, whether it's reconciliation or their normal budget process, to codify a lot of these changes into law. And so it is imperative that we reach out to our members of Congress and let them know what our opinions are on this stuff. Because if they start actually rescinding funds through a legislative process, which is a legal process at that point, then those funds are no longer available to argue for or extract for the purposes of providing services in our communities.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello? Okay. So I am from the state of Arkansas. And so actually, as of yesterday, we had some Doge cuts to our state budgets from DHS, Department of Health, and we've actually had conflicting news reports. So we're actually trying to figure out what exactly has been cut. But undeniably, Medicaid spending is on the table. Also, some of our substance abuse block grant funds are completely on the table. And so my question is, would it help for me to reach out to legislators right now in regards to further cuts on Medicaid? Like, do we need to do that now?
Yes, in fact, I did open up with the $12 billion cuts in federal grants that are largely going to states for services that you just outlined. And so that's where the urgency is. It's for us to be reaching out and talking with our legislators about this very issue.
Okay.
And I will, you're given a spoiler to our next section on the next webinar, but I just want to make sure we got all the questions. I'll ask Susan's question. Oh, it looks like Kyle actually maybe answered it in the chat. I don't know if you want to read your answer, Kyle, so that.
Yeah, I'll read it. The question was basically about whether Doge had a role in budget reconciliation, as far as like calculating savings, et cetera. And the answer is no. Doge is an executive branch entity, but they don't have a role in the reconciliation process. It is a purely congressional process. And I'm sure we'll see somebody try to find a way to get involved or dabble with their own numbers. But budget savings and cost estimates come from the Congressional Budget Office, and that is how they project this stuff out over a 10-year horizon. So the process is a congressional process, and separate from any executive processes.
I guess my question was partly, I understand that that's separate in Congressional Budget Office, but they have to, do they not have to look into all of the financials, all of the things going on that are supposedly dealing with the national budget? I mean, see, the Congressional Budget Office, do they have to, isn't there some kind of a, I mean, is there any kind of a connection? I guess my concern is what Doge would say of what they saved or jack up what they didn't save as input, even if they're not directly. Does that make sense? Because it's all about money too. What pockets of money, and the whole idea is to,
Sure.
savings and all of that. That's, I
Yeah.
guess, what I'm getting.
Understood. These are projections over a 10-year horizon. So, Doge is talking about actions they're taking now, and they can't even provide that data accurately. So, no, and also the numbers that they're talking about are very small when we're talking about $5 trillion over 10 years. So the answer is, no, is my answer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we got 1 more minute. Does anyone have any last minute questions?
I have a question. So this is actually my first time coming into contact with your organization. But this issue that we're speaking on right now is very near and dear to my heart, and has been for probably the last year. And so I was wondering, is there a way that I could reach out to one of you guys to further talk about what to do, particularly in the state of Arkansas?
Tori, I think this is your moment about the what to do. And then Arkansas, I think, Candia.
Yeah, and I'll put my email address in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, reach out to Candia. He's your man to further your outreach, but we do have some opportunities coming up for everybody on this call to get involved, as well as people who didn't attend the call. You want to share this out to your family, friends, colleagues, community leaders to get involved, because as you've seen, all these cuts, especially the ones we talked about with Medicaid and the Inflation Reduction Act, affect everybody. It affects jobs, public health, public safety, access to health, access to good health, and reducing pollution, reducing costs. These are all things that are near and dear to every single one of us. And even though the reconciliation process, the congressional budget process is very complicated and very much political. And it may seem that like, you know, all the players up top are making these decisions and us at the bottom have to just watch and see what happens. In the end, the congressmen, congresswomen, everybody were voted for, either put into office for you. You may have not voted for them, you may have voted for them, but they care for what you have to say as their constituent, because ultimately their goal is to get reelected. It may not seem like that, and they may be early into their terms, but if they can guarantee that if they are the ones to save Medicaid or save 300,000 plus jobs or billions of dollars flowing into their community, they can tout that and get themselves another badge to keep going for another reelection. They're going to vote. And so they want to hear what their constituents, what you want to say. And so this is the first webinar we have, kind of like a broad strokes of what the process is, what's at stake, and what's going on. But I want to invite you to our next webinar. If we can go to the next slide. It's called Don't Let Congress Cut Us Off. So we're going to be mobilizing for Medicaid and the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's happening April 11th, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. If you cannot make it to that time, still RSVP. We'll make sure that you get the recording. But this is going to be more of an action-oriented webinar where we're going to be teaching you and giving you the tools, the tactics, the resources, the talking points to effectively advocate for these issues. And you can decide to just do it on Medicaid. You could decide to do it on just the Inflation Reduction Act. You might as well come on in both and protect all the jobs and health benefits that we can. But we will have resources for both issues that you can get involved in. And so this particular webinar will be teaching folks how to effectively make phone calls to your legislators. We're going to be scenario planning as the congressional budget process goes through for the next few weeks until this webinar. And so we will be laying out different scenarios of, you know, if this person talks this or this meeting happens, if we hear what the top line numbers are going to be, we'll have messaging ready so that when the time comes, we will deploy you to speak out to your representative, to your senator, with the correct script, with the correct talking points and correct messaging to advocate on your behalf and the behalf of all of our communities. And so we'll be doing that with phone calls. We will also be teaching you on how to set up with in-district meetings with your legislators, because Kyle kind of mentioned this, they'll be going on Easter recess between April 14th and April 25th. So they will be back at home. And so you can hopefully try to set up a meeting with them, talk about these issues. We have plenty of folks here on the call, and many of us on dream.org are lobbying experts. And so we will give you the tools, the talking points, and everything you'll need to set up those meetings. And if in the event that you cannot set up a meeting, we will have the opportunity for you to drop off literature to your representative. So even if they don't get that person meeting, they don't get to hear your story, they'll still have literature and still have opportunities to know what you as their constituent cares about. And so I highly recommend joining this webinar, passing it off to your networks, to your coalitions, to your families who are at risk for all of these things that are going to be cut, and learn the process and how to be mobilized for this effort. So that's one opportunity. But if you're like really revved up to start doing work now and get some stuff done, we do have the lines to make a phone call available now. And so these phone call or these call scripts are ready to go. We have one for Medicaid, one for IRA. You'll click on the individual links. It will put in your information. It will pull in this call script. It will have the call script in written form, and then you'll hear one of our voices, audio form with the script as well, so that you can know what to say, make a phone call to your legislator right now, because as they're going through the processes, as they're going through these negotiations, They need to hear our voices as soon as possible. But we hope by April 11th, we'll have a little bit more guidance on what the exact cuts are going to be. And so then we might reframe or rework these scripts to be very narrowed and very specific. But please, if you have time, it only takes a minute to make a quick phone call and advocate on behalf of your community, and help protect some jobs, save some lives, life-saving treatments, programs, and opportunities. But that's all we have for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Hope you learned a lot, or hopefully your head's not spinning from how much that we went through. But I think Candia put his contact information. You can reach out to me. I'll put my contact information, but you'll have it as well. I'll make sure that everyone who came gets the recording, gets the PowerPoint, gets all the talking points, so that, yeah, and you can reach out to Berna as well for Inflation Reduction Act information. But thank you so much for tuning in, and hope to see you at the next one. Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Great information.
Thank you.